Okay, peeps, welcome back. So today we're going to be going over LTCN BCHG and HZEN, which is what we usually do, plus also the Grayscale ETH Classic Trust. So with that being said, let's get it. So the first two things that I would like to mention is number one, if you guys take a look here, we have updated you on this on X earlier this morning, but you guys can see that Bitcoin is currently at the price of $72,200. We did tell you that we thought that it was going to be a bullish breakout. There's a possibility of a cup and handle pattern here playing out into the halving. If there is a pullback, which it's hard to say at this point if it's going to happen or not, because we're above the previous all-time highs with a body close, it probably will end up happening during or after the halving. That's generally speaking, historically, what's kind of happened. As you guys can see here, well, not exactly right around the time of the halving, we kind of had the dump early, but it did happen back there. And I believe I'd have to go back and double check on the 2016 one, but looks like we did have some kind of dump in 2016 in the year of the halving. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the halving year was in 2016. It would make perfect sense because 2020 was the last time and 2024 was this time. So, and as you guys can see, we're still pretty massively overextended from the weekly EMAs, and also, what am I trying to say here? The previous support levels. If we go out to the monthly, it's actually even more ridiculous. As you guys can see, the red EMA is still sitting all the way down at 30,000. Do I think we're going to drop down to 30,000? No, I don't. I mean, at this point, we're pretty much just above the previous all-time high with a body close. I would say maybe Bitcoin kind of chops sideways and bleeds down a little bit into this support zone or resistance turn support now here, maybe down to 60,000, and then bang, we pop up from there towards the end of the year. I would say that's probably the most bearish case scenario at this point. I don't really, either this thing's just simply not going to slow down, or we'll have like a very slow bleed into the time that maybe a little chop sideways before we end up pumping at the end of the year. I would say is the most likely scenario. Number two thing I want to mention here before we get into the actual content is there have been a few requests for when we're going to take profits on these Grayscale trusts. We're actually going to make that in a separate video, so we have to set all that up first, but we will do an entirely separate video for basically all of the positions that we're in. So we're going to show you all the positions that we're in, not just in Grayscale, but the Bitcoin miners, all the native cryptocurrencies. We're going to give you guys estimates of where we intend to take profits or start taking profits. But again, we have to set all that up. That's not going to be in this video because that's going to take quite some time to go through. We don't have it set up yet. So that is number two. And if we go over here to the portfolio, you guys can see it's been a massively, massively bullish day for the Grayscale trusts. The ones that we're in just today, we're up about 12.5%. As you can see here, 18.3% on LTCN, almost 17% on BCHG, and 5% on ETCG, which hasn't really moved much because, again, once Ethereum goes parabolic, ETH Classic is going to do the same. That's the way it happened last cycle, so we expect it to be the same this cycle. Are we going to take profits now? No. This is not even close to where we intend to take profits. And at this point, we're kind of like in a buy and hold stage. We'll get into that in the video where we talk about our targets, but we don't really have any plans on selling any of these in the immediate short term. So anyways, with that being said, let's get into the content here. So you guys can see LTCN has had a massive move up. We did tell you guys that we thought that out of this ascending triangle and or this flag, that the peak would be somewhere around this resistance zone at the top, roughly about $27. So we have gotten nearly to that point. At the peak today, it was at almost $25 on LTCN, which is huge. We do think LTCN is going to go much, much higher than this. One of the main reasons is if we go back here again, we take a look at the price of Litecoin. It has just absolutely gone beast mode. So this thing just this week is up absolutely massive. If we measure this It's up for, Litecoin itself is up roughly about 25%, so that's huge. The next level of resistance on Litecoin, I would say, is probably going to be somewhere around here. So it's quite a bit higher than where it is right now. That's roughly about another nearly 50%, so 30 to 50% higher. And then, of course, you'd have roughly about 240 would be the next stop. If we get to that point, we'll talk about it. But Litecoin's looking very bullish, so we're kind of expecting LTCN over the next few days to really start seriously pumping to the upside. Where exactly it's going to go, that's impossible to say. But what I will say is if we get a break out of this resistance zone, we're probably heading all the way up here. So if I zoom out here, you guys can see why this is a clear resistance level. You have your wick high here, your wick low here. Those are swing levels, swing low, swing high. That's a clear resistance zone. So it could be all the way up between 100 to as much as $135 a share. Are we going to sell at that point? No, we're not. We're not selling even. Not even close. It would have to go much, much higher than that for us to even be willing to part with a single share of the LTC that we have. Which again, we'll get into why that is in a later video. But anyways, so we'll move on to the next one here. So BCHG, this one is pushing into this kind of macro resistance zone. You guys can see here. I would say that there's a possibility for all of these altcoins and Bitcoin to pull back, especially with Bitcoin just having gone straight from 50K to 72K. It's possible. You guys need to be aware of that. There could be a massive pullback at any point in time. It did happen last cycle. When we got to that April peak in 2021, I think it was starting in May, Bitcoin had a massive 50% drop and the altcoins just got absolutely destroyed. They went down like 70%. So it's something to keep in mind. These things could pull back. We're not going to buy any more of the Grayscale Trust at this point because they're starting to get a little expensive. There's still plenty of altcoins to buy, which we're doing. But we'll go over the support and resistance here in case you guys want to know. So anyways, support at $7 to $7.60. Resistance at $10 to $12.70 a share. I would say it might catch some resistance at this zone because it's very heavily traded. But if it gets above and beyond that, this thing could head up to, I would say, probably roughly around $20 a share would be the next stop. So we'll zoom out a little bit here. So HZEN is the next one. This one is just really, really overextended massively. As you guys can see, it's like way up there. So we still have three. Wait, what is today? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So we still have 4 more trading sessions to go, but this candle up here looks pretty bearish. That's a shooting star. That's a very bearish candle. We'll have to see how this plays out. But again, we are still in the middle of the week, so we don't know for sure what direction this is going to go yet. It is still in a bull trend, so something to keep in mind. Your support's between 680 to 815. Resistance between 1130 to roughly about 12 and a quarter a share. I think, in my personal opinion, I think HZEN is going to go much higher than $30 in this cycle. There are many, many different reasons for that. One is the potential of a spot Ether ETF coming up in May. And BlackRock is involved in that, as well as, of course, the spot Bitcoin ETFs, which is probably, hypothetically, the reason why the spot Bitcoin ETFs even got approved in the first place was because BlackRock was involved in it. Of course, that's just pure speculation. So if the Ether ETF gets approved, then that's extremely bullish for not just Ethereum, but all altcoins that are based on Ethereum. Horizon is not, but it is still an altcoin. As you guys know, altcoins move with Ethereum and with Bitcoin, okay? So that's HZEN. We'll go over now to ETH Classic. This thing is sitting at resistance currently, so the support zone below this is 1350 to 1625. We haven't had a close above resistance yet, so that's not actually support. So 1770 to $20 is going to be roughly about the resistance zone. If we do the measured move from zone to zone, you're talking roughly about 25 to 40% in the immediate short term. ETH Classic, sky is the limit on this one. If an ETH as a spot Ether ETF gets approved, it could go way, way higher than $95. Exactly what? We're going to get into that in a later video, not this time. But yeah, I'd say this is overall looking pretty bullish. In me personally, I'm not. I think that the risk is too high to get in at these levels on any of these. So since we're already positioned, we're not going to buy anymore unless there's a huge pullback. But keep in mind that could happen. If you want to get in, you can get in whenever you want to. That's entirely up to you. But GXLM here, as you guys can see, we busted through this resistance zone. But again, this has not closed above the resistance on the weekly time frame, so not necessarily bullish just yet. I would say that if it does have a pullback, it might pull back into like this trend line here, which is roughly about 38. You could potentially look at getting in there, or maybe somewhere around these EMAs at like $30. That's a possibility. So resistance is 58 to 53. If we just do the measured move from the top of the rising wedge, you can see it's a pretty large move. It's about 40 to 50%. And then the move from the EMAs would be obviously even bigger, but that requires patience. You know, you basically have to have plenty of cash sitting on the side. You'd have to wait for the move. If it even comes, it may never come. Don't know. But that's a kind of different scenario. That's more of a position trade. So roughly about 82 to 100%. ETH, this one does look very similar to Bitcoin with the whole cup and handle setup. I haven't seen the actual pullback yet. If we see a pullback that looks like a handle, we'll obviously point that out to you guys. As of right now, this support zone still remains as support. So it's basically between $25.50 to $29, and resistance is $41 to about $47. So we'll do the measured move on that. You could be looking at anywhere between 50 to roughly about 75%. So pretty good move on the immediate short term on that. And as for like macro cycle peak targets, we'll get into that in a different video. This video would be way too long to talk about that here. So we will address it at some point. We're just not going to do it in this particular video. So Zcash, it has had a breakout of this resistance zone, but it's still not resistance because it has not closed on the weekly. Or I'm sorry, it's still not support because it has not closed on the weekly. So we're going to keep an eye out for that. It looks very bullish. So you could do one of two things here. You can either buy at the resistance zone and assume that it's going to turn into support. That's a little bit more risky, but you could do that. So that would be between 730 to 790. The current support is between $4.50 to $5, and current resistance between $14 and $17. So if you got in at the first resistance or support, I should say, and you were correct in your call about saying, okay, it's going to bounce off of, it's going to turn this resistance into support, bounce, and then head up to the next zone. You'd make somewhere between roughly about 84 to 124%. But if you think it's not going to hold and it's going to dump, and you get back in at this zone down here, to get back up to the presumed current support level, you basically make between 57 to 70%, and then all the way up to about 200 to 270%. So pretty huge difference there. GSOL has had a huge pullback. I mean, good Lord, look at this thing. This is just, this is crazy. But we tried to tell you guys that, at some point this thing's going to get so overextended that it is going to have a massive pullback, and that's exactly what happened here. I mean, when it looks like it's just going in a straight line up, that's when we start to get a little worried, and we're like, okay, either we need to get out or we're just not going to touch it because it's just too risky. So if this thing does drop anymore, you could pick it up somewhere between 200 to 290 per share. I would say if it was me, I wouldn't even buy this till it got into the zone down here, but to each their own. So if you got in at 200 and it did go back up, which I'm pretty confident it's going to, it'd be about 187% move. And I say that because the halving hasn't happened yet. Okay. So Bitcoin, altcoins are not really truly flying off the handles yet because the halving's not here. Once the halving happens, when that parabolic run starts to take place is anybody's guess. There's a common phrase that's used in the crypto space that I've heard a lot. that goes slowly, gradually, suddenly. Okay. So before the spot Bitcoin ETFs got approved, we were in the slowly phase. From that time until now, we're in the gradually phase. Okay. We haven't gotten to the suddenly phase, meaning we're getting ready to start moving to those blow off tops. I would say that we're still in the gradually phase right now. So there is still time to pick up these shares on the cheap, but it's probably smart, not financial advice, to be strategic about it. So, Mana, this thing is really overextended. I would not be buying it at these levels. That's just my opinion. If you guys wanted to buy at support, it's going to be roughly about $17.50 to $20 a share. Just to give you an idea of just how far this thing could drop down, kind of like GSOL. And do keep in mind, this is normal in crypto. This happens, okay? It's going to be about a nearly 70% move to get back down to that zone. But if you were patient, you got back in at the zone and it did rip higher, it'd be a pretty large move, almost a 250% gain. So that's pretty big. So it's very similar on GBAT compared to Mana. So definitely expecting a pullback at some point on this one because it's just gone so beast. To get back to the zone again, it's roughly about 70%. So if you wanted to get in, let's say probably right at the top of this trend line, because it could potentially support that and bounce, it'd be about $6. You'd be looking at roughly about a 210% gain. Again, where you choose to get in that's entirely your choice. So current supports on G-Link is 67 to about 85, and then below that 40 to about 47. This one does look like it kind of wants to pull back. That's a very shooting star looking candle, but we'll have to see how it plays out for the rest of the week. If you got in from this zone, you'd be looking at roughly, just in the immediate short term, nearly a 200% move. And if you were lucky enough to get a pullback all the way back here, assuming that it does happen, it would be even bigger. You'd be looking at more than double at that point, 420%. So huge move right there. Phil G, yeah, same thing. So this one's looking extremely overbought. Like even Bitcoin doesn't look this overbought. Massive drop to get back down to support. Even if we assume that this was support, still roughly about an 83% drop. So like that candle setup right there, massive drop. So I would at least, if it was me, I'd be waiting for this thing to get all the way back down to the red EMA because that's how expensive it is. So if you got it down there, roughly about 465%, which again is kind of where that 4 candle setup is right there. You can see that wick and then those bodies. So that's kind of what's going on with PhilG. GLIV, again, this one is massively overextended. I would not touch this with a 10-foot pole at this point unless I was planning on shorting. But again, shorting in a bull market in crypto is suicide. So anyways, the zone down here is between $12 to roughly about $15. I would be personally not wanting to buy this until it got to that zone. So if you got it in the zone, it would be a huge move, about 500%. And something else to keep in mind, like there's a lot. I mean, the grayscale trusts, some of them are getting pretty expensive. I would say LTCN is still relatively cheap, although it is starting to get expensive. BCHG is still relatively cheap, in my opinion, compared to the all-time high. The all-time high is at $60. So not obviously you wouldn't get as much of a return as what we're going to get with our $4 entry, but if you're just now finding out about this, of course, that's not your fault. So timing is everything in markets. Let's just put it like that. So HZEN looking a little expensive. I would say that ETH Classic is still very cheap because, again, Ethereum has not really run. And you can see ETH Classic's peak is like way up here, $95. So big gap in between that. And I would say that Zcash is also very cheap. The grayscale version, I mean. But the rest, like all these ones down here, very expensive. Maybe with the exception of GSOL, I'd be waiting for a little bit more of a pullback. And there is other things out there on the markets that can be bought that are cheap. Okay, there's things like the Bitcoin miner stocks are still extremely cheap right now. Eventually they're going to pump, probably after the halving would be my guess. A lot of the native cryptocurrencies are still cheap. I know Bitcoin and Ethereum and things like Solana are relatively expensive right now, but there's a lot of other altcoins that are also pretty cheap. There's even like, there's Coney and there's MSTY. There's, I believe the UTLY, the new fund from YieldMax, also has some of the Bitcoin miners in it. So there's the possibility to buy that for, dividends, maybe some price appreciation. So, anyways, it's something to keep in mind. So I think we're going much higher from here on the Grayscale Trust, the ones that are not already massively overextended. That's just my opinion. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed this content. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see y'all later. Peace.